Thanks for taking the time, guys, to come out here in this snow megaton. I think that's kind of what we've described it as so far. It's pretty terrible out there, but at the same time, it's nice to have a group here that's kind of interested in making it all the way in even such terrible conditions. So today's talk, I'm planning to kind of quickly introduce myself, company, and tell you a little bit about data and sport. So I'm not sure how many of you are Score app fans, but I'm sure you've seen the trend over the past 5-10 years. More data, more analytics, more numbers being spit out. Even the way fans are talking about sport is changing. We don't play in the fan side of things, but I'll talk a little bit about that. We actually focus much more on developing technology that can help teams perform at their best by giving them real data about how their athletes are doing. So let's jump right in. I'll tell you a little bit about us. So we're a sport technology company. We're based out of Liberty Village. And what we do is we build wearable hardware technology that can basically, fundamentally, it's motion sensing that can be used to quantify an athlete's performance across over 500 exercises and movements. What we do is we package this wearable technology with a software solution that can help coaches quickly test hundreds of athletes, get real insights about how they're doing over time, and then from there be able to understand if the training program is improving, getting them better. If they were injured, are they finally recovered to get back in the game, and so on. So basically help them drive decision making in a sport organization. We've had the good fortune over the past 6 years of working with some incredible teams. These are kind of a quick highlight of some of the teams that we work with. We've been primarily focused on North America, but last year was kind of our first year to start focusing on international growth. So we've gotten some really exciting logos and teams that spent some time in China in September. We started to work with the Chinese Olympic Committee. We work with the Dutch Olympic team as well, ski team, Irish Rugby Union, and we work with a number of NBA and NFL teams here as well. It's been a really fun ride. It's been amazing to learn so much from just working with these guys and understanding how a sport organization functions. There's actually a lot of lessons that I've learned working with these sport organizations that I've fed right back into our company, which is kind of fun to think about your own organization as a sport team that's competing. In terms of the agenda, the goal for today is I'm not going to focus too much on diving into the numbers and the data metrics themselves. I think it's probably more helpful because my guess is none of you guys are sport data scientists. So I'm going to try to focus more on giving you an overview of how a sport organization tackles data, what are the key areas that they focus on, so that the goal is by the time you come out of this talk, you should have a pretty good sense of all the different areas where data is being generated in sport teams. Why are they generating this data? How are they thinking about this data? And what are they looking to do with it? And if you have any questions about specific metrics, don't hesitate to come back out. Ask me. I'll have my contact information on the last slide. I'd be more than happy to dive into the weeds with you and walk you through the details of it. But for now, let's focus on giving you kind of that framework so you can kind of understand how data is being used. And in terms of the kind of the structure of the presentation, I'm going to quickly talk about two key overriding driving factors that have really pushed for data and technology adoption in sport. Talk a little bit about what the goal is ultimately here and how a sport organization is structured. Talk a little bit about how tech helps across all aspects of an organization in sport, and then finally touch a little bit on the future of data in sport and kind of what we can expect over the next 10 years. And by the way, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, don't be shy. Just put your hand up. I'm more than happy to stop and answer a specific question around the slide. All right, so let's talk about the key overriding driving factors for this. We're really starting to kind of skim the top of what human body is capable of doing. I think it's pretty obvious to anybody who's seen sports. We're really pushing the boundaries at this point. And sure, in the 50s and 60s, we managed to build better shoes. That kind of got us a little bit faster, that got us a little bit stronger, diet got better, but we're really starting to get to kind of the final frontier, and that's why I call this presentation Data and Sport, the Final Frontier. Just to give you kind of quick sense of what I'm talking about, let's look at a really interesting sport as an example. So track and field in the Olympics. It's considered one of the purest sports. Every other strength coach, every other sports scientist I talk to in other sports look up to track and field because there's something beautiful about this idea of a single individual spending their entire life, but every 4 years, spend 4 years training for this single event, the Olympics, right? You have one individual training all in their own head, practicing on their own, a very specific and clear movement, running, right? So you have a 100-meter sprint, Usain Bolt, you practice day in, day out, you program for 4 years to get to this single event that will basically judge you And that's how you leave your entire... Imagine if you were building a piece of code and everything basically boiled down to you shipping it on one day, and that's all that mattered, no matter how good it was the day after. So it's a completely different kind of approach and thinking. And there's something really pure about that in the way in how far you can deeply dig and try to understand what's going on. But to give you an idea of what happened, so the modern Olympics were established in 1896. Since then, in the first 50 years, we've managed to shave off the 100-meter sprint about 1.5 seconds off the best time. Since then, so 70 years later, we've shaved less than 0.7 seconds. So we're really starting to get kind of to the top. And if you would look at a chart, you'll see that the rate of change over the past 20 years is definitely starting to plateau. So that's one of the driving factors for starting to look a lot more about how can we use data to get insights that maybe aren't so simple. The low-hanging fruit are kind of done now, so we're really starting to look for ways that we can see the big picture. And the other one, of course, is that we live in a data age. Every organization is thinking about how do we leverage the data we have to get better. Sport is no exception. Sport is actually, if anything, really well geared for it. They already think in numbers to a large extent. So it's natural that a lot of GMs, owners of teams are thinking, we have all this data about our athletes, how do we win? How do we outcompete using data and better metrics and analytics? And that's why a lot of them are kind of going through what's in the industry called an arms race right now. Of who's going to build the best data science team first? Who's going to be able to leverage the cloud best? Who's going to be able to deploy machine learning algorithms to be able to do some interesting prediction around talent identification or recruiting or injury recovery? That's exactly the kind of push that's starting to happen in the industry. Super excited to be part of it. So before we kind of dive into the data in sport, let's just talk quickly about the goal here. It's kind of obvious in sport, it's winning, right? Ultimately, every single sport team is focused on one thing, how do we win? And there's a real business reason for that as well. It's not just the glory and the glamour that comes with winning a league, whether it's Super Bowl or NBA Cup, but it's a lot more focused on also the business side of it derives tons of revenue and value out of the team winning. So naturally, every time they make it to the finals, teams sell more tickets, they sell more merchandise, media rights. So there's a business logic that's driving victory, and at the same time, the teams and the athletes are motivated by it. So we just can't lose sight of that, because I think it's easy to dive, and I've seen this happen in the space, where people start chasing numbers for numbers' sake, but without really understanding what the ultimate motivating factor. Every single team owner is thinking about, how is this technology, they're always evaluating how is this going to fundamentally move the needle in terms of me winning more games. So it's always good to be able to tie whatever you're doing in data in sports to that. Now, there are multiple different ways that you can think about it. Obviously, defining the goal as winning is easy. It's how do you get there? That's what every single team is thinking about day and night. I like to personally break down sport organization and the factors that drive success into 3 key areas. It's always good to have a framework when you're trying to tackle complex problems like this. In my head, I've always thought, and I've broken it down from experience, into 3 key areas: people, preparation, and planning. So when you think about people, obviously that's the engine that drives everything that's going on. You've got to make sure that you have the right athletes on your squad that are the best athletes that you can find and get. Preparation, you want to make sure that the team is physically prepared for the demands of the game. They're ready in season and off season to be in the best shape possible. And then finally planning, so the strategy and tactics that gets built on top of that as well. So how can tech and data help across all 3 areas? We'll kind of tackle them one by one. I'll give you guys a quick highlight of each aspect of it. But first, let's kind of quickly walk you through a sport org so you kind of have a sense of how it all shakes out. So basically, this is kind of a nice little chart I put together to kind of walk you through it. Sport organizations are different by region and by country, and there's all kinds of structures, especially at the Olympic level, that can complicate things, including politicians and politics and different sports and their needs. But at a high level, you can kind of look at this as a template. You have the owner or owners, you have GM, head coach, and then you have marketing, operations, scouting, strength conditioning, and sports medicine. The area we're concerned with mainly is sports medicine, S&C, and scouting, and a head coach. The other part is much more focused on revenue and marketing, and it does benefit from the data that's being generated, but fundamentally the area that matters most for us and the area that leverages data most is on the team side. And at the end of the day, the vast majority of the data being collected is tied to the athletes themselves. So there's a lot of discussions going on around what can you collect, how can you collect it in the most efficient and seamless way possible. Quickly touching on the first component, people, the engine of a sport team. It's kind of obvious why athletes are so important. Sometimes I think as fans we overvalue one talented athlete really changing the fate of a team. It's often not dependent on one, but you do need incredible athletes to be able to perform. Because at the end of the day, no matter what data you're capturing, if the engine of your team is just not at the level that it needs to be at, there's nothing data can really do to drive it forward. Let's talk a little bit about the data. So this is some of the things that you'll see a lot of people talk about when it comes to athletes and data. So the areas that they're being used within sport organizations is, number one, I would say talent ID. Every single team that I'm meeting these days has a data science team that's focused on basically mapping out and scouting all the athletes. Back in the day, I'll tell you guys a little story actually. I don't know if you've ever read, there's a book called by Alex Ferguson, called Leading, and he talks a little bit of the story about how he found Cristiano Ronaldo. They discovered Cristiano Ronaldo. And basically the main reason, what you kind of get out of reading this chapter is that the main reason they found him is because his assistant coach happened to be Portuguese. And he happened to be back home, vacation. He was going around and he heard through his network of this athlete that seemed to be really promising. They heard so many good things about him in Portugal, they ended up flying in, meeting him, signing him immediately, and they managed to steal him weeks or months away before somebody else did. Put him through the feeder system at Man U, and he became who he is, and they managed to get 8 incredible years out of this talented athlete. That's great back then in the 90s and the early 2000s, but things are changing. It's not the same anymore. Now we have companies and startups that are working on mapping out, collecting data from kids as young as 9 or 10. So you're looking at rec leagues getting equipped with sensors and data that's being captured either subjectively through people watching the games or people actually just signing up and organizing themselves at a community level digitally. And scouts are tapping into this information to try to see if there's any signs of potential talent at an early age. Find that diamond, quickly get your hands on it because every other team is going to want to try it. This is really common in soccer where every single soccer team has their own academies, so they fully invested themselves into actually building up the talent at a super young age. So this is something that we're seeing data really start flowing in. So things like, if you're even a 12 or 13-year-old, how are you performing in the games? Are you winning? All that data is being digitized. All of it is being fed into massive cloud systems. It's even layered in the NFL, for example. They layer it with video footage of college games. So if they're looking at any college athletes and recruits, they have fully mapped out games that are fully digitized, so they can actually quickly query it and find out play-by-play, how is this athlete performing in specific games and sports. So it's really cool to kind of see the level of research that's going into this. Recovery and readiness are 2 other key areas, obviously. So looking at how athletes are recovering in season, especially in leagues like NBA or MLB, where you're constantly on the road, traveling between games and games, it can really start wearing you out. We think of some of these star athletes, it's really amazing how well they play in each game. What to me, though, after being in the space for so long, amazes me is how well they play consistently throughout the season. That's really what makes a star athlete, and that's where the team behind the athlete really shines. How do you make sure that this person is fully recovered? Back in the day, it used to be as simple as just asking. Now there's a much more focus on how do we grab your heart rate variability data to actually look at how's your neural system ready for the game. So they're capturing all these different metrics about an athlete. There are sensors that you can place, like stuff that we can even access as consumers, Beddit, sleep monitors. Different athletes have different preferences, and teams are starting to tap into all these different devices to try to capture sleep data, readiness data on how they're doing. And then finally, position KPIs. We see this as fans to some extent. We always hear about different athletes and how their top speeds are in specific sports. This is really common now. When it comes to actual sport organizations and how they do it themselves, they basically feed, they get the insights from the head coach. What do they want? What are the strategies that need to be played? Then they look at different positions within that sport, and they immediately try to identify folks that can fit within certain parameters. If you need a really fast swinger, they make sure that they can find the right people, and that's a metric that they actually keep. I'll talk about how they store the data in a little bit. Planning systems and tactics. I kind of jumped to this one real quick because I just want to touch on it. There's a whole world here of tools that could be used to basically drive decision making. Obviously, at the end of the day, if you don't have the right athletes, things don't work. But you also need a coaching staff, a sophisticated coaching staff that can actually understand how every single competitor is going to be playing, what are the common strategies being used, and just making sure that you can actually deploy the best strategy against them. And the kind of things that are really starting to happen on this end is it was really common back in the day to have, and to some extent, in some teams in the NFL, it's so common, you'll find teams of 10, 15 people that are just full-time watching video footage, whether it's from college recruits that they're interested in recruiting or other NFL teams in game times, just constantly sitting there, scrolling through a video, marking and tagging every single clip so that a head coach, if they want to see exactly how an athlete plays or how another team likes to run the ball in specific situations, they can pull that up really easily. So all this stuff was done manually. Now there's a big focus on, okay, it's good to be able to tag it manually. We want to automate that to some extent, but also how do we make this data really easy to query? How do we pull it up so that we can write something simple like, I want to see Cristiano Ronaldo in a specific position. I want to see Messi in this specific role. I want to see Barcelona in this specific situation against a specific formation or halfway through the season. Those are the kind of things that it's much more focused, I would say, when you're dealing with head coaches and generating data, about making it easy to access the data, because they're fundamentally going to trust their gut a lot more, but they want to be able to quickly access references so they can make decisions. There is obviously a focus on readiness and training loads. The same book that I just mentioned earlier, Alex Ferguson was one of the first guys to actually start looking at objectively quantifying training. It's easy to say as a head coach, you know, say I'm a Bill Belichick, since it's Super Bowl is next weekend. It's easy for me to say, okay, my team is playing on Sunday. They're traveling back on Monday. I'm gonna try to give them a light practice on Tuesday, and then maybe a hard practice on Wednesday, and then give them Thursday off, and then back to do a little drill, and then they play again on Sunday. It's easy to map this out, but the challenge for what people are realizing is that it's one thing to say this is an easy practice, but how do you know objectively that it's easy for every single athlete on the team? And this is kind of where sensors like ours and others are really focused, is how do we objectively measure every single training session and make sure that all the athletes, we can put a number to how much effort they put into that practice session. It's amazing some of the stuff I've seen. Working with the 49ers especially, I spent about 3 months working out of their stadium and seeing the data that's coming off each practice session. You could look at the same squad, 60 guys on the field, and you'll find that 5% of them did 2 to 3 times more running than the rest. And if you were just simply saying as a head coach, I'm going to treat everybody here the same as if they practice the same, you're running into real trouble as you get closer to the season. This is where soft tissue injuries come to play, right? When you hear about people tearing their hamstring, ACL, and more often than not it's because of overtraining. So this is where being able to capture data like this can really help you understand how to modulate your training schedule and individualize it per athlete. Similar to what we're seeing across. It's amazing how sport and healthcare are kind of, there's some kind of measured common trends. You'll see in healthcare, there's all this talk right now about individualizing healthcare. It's very similar in sport. This is exactly what they're pushing for. The stakes are obviously much higher in sport because you're talking about signing guys for $150 million for 3-4 year contracts. If they tear an ACL into the first season, you've just lost $50 million. So there's real pressure for teams to perform and measure how their athletes are doing. And then finally, let's talk about preparation. That's really where we play as Push. We're much more focused on helping coaches behind the athlete get the data they need to make the right decisions. So we work with strength coaches, physiotherapists, sport medicine, and basically what we do is we provide them with, we have 2 different solutions on the market right now. We're working on a 3rd this year, which I'll be announcing later this year. Basically what we've built is we built an athlete readiness assessment system. This one right here in this picture. Basically, you can think of it like an airport kiosk check-in booth. An athlete can walk in every day, stand on a scale, quickly dial in some information, answer some subjective surveys, because at the end of the day, subjective data really matters. And at the same time, they can put a little finger sensor on. We capture their HRV, heart rate variability. That tells us how physiologically they're doing. We know their weight, so we can extrapolate from that hydration levels. If your weight changes dramatically after a practice session, we know how much water weight you lost. We know when you come back the next day, have you regained that water weight or not? There's tons of research backing these things up, and we just make collection of data and visualizing data really, really easy for teams. And our most popular system, that's kind of what we're known for, what we launched with, is the Push Band. And you can kind of see it in the picture way at the back. That's a Chinese volleyball team, men's volleyball team, and they have the sensor right on the barbell. And basically what they use it for is to get real-time feedback and strength conditioning. So, when we all think about strength conditioning, we often think about like rugby and American football, but SNC is used across the board. We work with Cirque du Soleil, we work with National Ballet Company in London. Pretty much any human that moves for a living where the stakes of obviously moving faster, moving more efficiently, where being less injury prone is important. Those are all things where strength and conditioning could dramatically help and change your performance. So what we do is our data, the motion sensor measures lots of science, basically correlating speed of movement with fatigue, and we basically get the athlete to stop and exercise before they get too tired. We automatically flag it, they can move on, and the nice thing about it for a coach is instead of having to sit there and eyeball every single athlete on the squat rack and try to understand how each one is doing, they can just use our data real time to basically trust that the athlete is going to be okay and they're going to get exactly what they need out of that training session. There's a lot more I don't want to just talk about push, I want to kind of highlight all the different tools that are being developed. This is by far where most of the innovation is going right now. And a lot of it, of course, is going to bleed over to the consumer space eventually. So we can all expect to get our hands on things like this over time. You can see here the Ultra G. This is if you have an ACL injury and you are trying to get back in the ring. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. By show of hands, have you ever seen an Ultra G? It's pretty cool, right? It's super futuristic. Basically, what you'll see this in every single pro team. I've yet to see one that doesn't have it. Basically, you strap this thing on, you run, and essentially it gives you like an altered gravity factor when you're running. So you actually feel a lot lighter. So you can basically jog without putting nearly as much pressure on your body. So it's a way for somebody who's not quite ready yet to get back into the kind of full sprint mode in the game. It's a good way for them to just get back into moving without putting that much stress on the body. And there's all kinds of other sensors and devices that are being developed. Some of the innovation that's happening right now is in strapping multi-motion sensors and actually fully modeling the biomechanics of an athlete, how they're moving. So not just looking at quantifying the output, but looking at the quality of movement as well, which is really, really exciting. I kind of touched on a bunch of those things. I'll quickly, at a high level, just because this is where most of the innovation is happening, I just want to add one layer. I want to dive one layer deep. Basically, you can break up physical preparation into 3 parts. There's on-field performance. There's companies out there, primarily GPS-based, that are looking at quantifying how long is each practice session, how much is the athlete is running, they're starting to couple it with heart rate, so you can look at a heart rate data for the entire drill session with an athlete. The other one is physical preparation. That's where our push band lies. So basically looking at doing jump assessments, seeing how for example, if you're training young basketball athletes, how do you make sure that they're actually getting to jump higher through your strength conditioning program? You do it by measuring their jump using our sensors or other sensors that do the same. And finally, there's nutrition and sleep. So focusing on how are they doing outside of the time that they're spending with coaches. Are they eating well? Are they sleeping? And this is done in all kinds of different ways right now. I would say it's a gray area. There's still a lot of questions. The best thing that I've seen so far is just asking the athlete and building the right culture so that the athlete can be well educated and honest about what they're doing. So I've already kind of touched on a bunch of these things. Biometrics, recovery, readiness, physical strength. There's all kinds of metrics behind the scenes that kind of convey all this information. And then I think the most exciting thing that I'm seeing now is there are companies out there, and I've kind of listed some of their logos down there. One of them is Canadian Conduct out of Halifax. What they're focusing on is basically building it's called an AMS, an athlete management system. And what they've done is integrated with every single hardware company or software company that's providing a data stream. So the nice thing about an AMS is that as a GM or an owner or head coach, I can log in here, I can see my athlete's profile, and I can see every single metric that's relevant. And I can start drawing correlations between their performance on practice and their recovery, their physical preparation, their readiness, or they got sick here, or this is their injury stats, so I know they're injured right now and I can get them back in here. So you can really manage a team of 30, 40 guys plus the backups really, really easily. This is where I think the future is going to be really exciting as well, because you start thinking about, you merge all these data into one database, and what's the next logical thing to do, of course, is try to deploy some models that can actually learn and do some prediction for you, whether it's in helping you identify why the stars are the stars and how to find more people that can fit that model, or how do you make sure that if you have any negative trends that you can also kind of subvert it. And this is something that's really starting to come develop. So any questions so far? I've described to you guys the framework. Do you feel like you've learned a little bit more about how sports functions? Is this helpful? Or you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. You guys are mostly in the strength and conditioning space. And they talk about sports a lot. They're analytics guys, and you have the old school guys who don't accept analytics. Do you
Yeah.
any of that in strength and conditioning where there's the
Yeah.
split in the two groups?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I would say it's happening across the board in all industries, and sport is no exception there. There's still, I still remember when we first launched Push 6 years ago, some of the conversations I would have is, I remember one coach coming up to me at a conference and just like right in my face telling me, I don't need sensors, I got these two. And that was his answer basically to everything that we're trying to pitch. So these guys do exist. Good news is that guy retired, his assistant is in place now, and he's got a master's in sports science, so he knows his stuff and he's moving forward. So there's definitely a generational shift, but it's really amazing to me the change over the past 5 years and how we've evolved. The kinds of conversations I'm having where teams are so much more educated now. It used to be about, I would say a few years ago, it was about just like spray and pray, buy everything and see what sticks, but now it's much more structured. They're thinking along these lines of like, okay, here's our framework, here's our model, here are the data streams that we want. Yeah. So you had a question? Yeah.
Sorry, great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Sports guys.
Thanks.
And I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah.
I have like a million questions. There's that area I'm going to take over. With the NFL,
Yeah.
was this kind of data used to cancel the two-a-days?
The two-a-day? Yeah.
Remember the two-a-days?
Yeah.
So was this kind of data used to cancel the two-a-days? Because I know like the big alarm was like, oh, people who died.
Yeah.
But you're looking at this data and say, you know what, we don't need that second practice.
Yeah, that's exactly it. This is the kind of conversations that people are having. I'm not too familiar with specifically what drove that decision, but in general, I can tell you like a thing that I've heard consistently from 3 NFL teams this last season is that they've completely changed the way they approach modulating their practice. So the biggest challenge with the NFL is you have a big team, so you know, no matter how big your staff is, you can't keep up with every single athlete. So you definitely need data to try to figure out, okay, we have 50 guys, how do we know which ones are ready, which ones aren't, and how did this practice session impact every single one of them? So there is a need for it, but beyond it, they realize pretty quickly that their challenge is they have one day off, it's an incredibly strenuous sport, even though they don't play that many games, it's really stressful on the body, so their recovery became much more of a hot topic, and a big discussion now is a lot of the head coaches are embracing the idea that you can't just take it easy on Tuesday and then Wednesday just spike it all the way up and expect nothing to happen, because they've seen it in multiple teams now where as soon as you go from really light days, you look like a runner. I'm assuming you run? Yeah, a little bit? Okay, so you know this is a runner, right, intuitively. You can't go from running, the technical term is acute to chronic ratio. You can't go from 5 kilometers a day to 20 kilometers the next day and not expect something bad to happen. Surprise, surprise, this was not common knowledge in the NFL, and they would just push for people. The idea was just like, let's just drive people as hard as we can, and whatever happens, happens. The attitude now has changed dramatically, because you realize if you have a star, like let's say with the Niners and Jimmy Garoppolo, you want to keep that guy as healthy as possible. You don't want to stress his body beyond the need, because ultimately you want him to win, and you want him to be consistent throughout the season. If you lose him 2 games in, what's the point? No matter how good he was in those 2 games. So this is the kind of discussions that are starting to happen now, and instead of just going in blind or just subjectively testing the head coach's gut, now they're really thinking, okay, I think this was a medium session. Was it a medium session? Let's look at the data. And one of our products, the Push Vital system, can actually, we take in data from the field and we visualize all that for them. So you can see in red, green, orange, here's how the session was, and you can see it on every single athlete. So you can quickly get a sense of how to change things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change your game plan as a head coach. It just means that you need to now modulate the other pieces of an athlete's life. So maybe the weight room session now could be 20% of what it was supposed to be, because we really worked them hard here. And that's the kind of discussions that are starting to happen now. Yeah, go ahead.
What's if you had to pick the number one concern with sports organizations and consistent for peak performance?
Yeah.
What's the number one thing they're looking at?
Number one thing. It's tough with data, right? To say like the number one. If I had to say right now, the number one thing I'll probably say is, I would say it's injuries. So soft tissue injuries specifically. Preventing soft tissue injuries. I would say that's what every single technology company and where the demand is coming from. It's like, it's not so much about finding the best athletes, because they already have systems that are pretty good and they're getting better with Talent ID. They're all obsessing about how do I make sure that, because they lose sleep over it, right? How do I make sure that the star athlete I just signed is actually going to play every single game for the rest of the season? And how do I make sure that I schedule everything to make sure that he gets there? So that's
so
part
like
of it.
Kawhi Leonard, for example.
Yeah.
Is he pressing too much? Because I don't know. Like, he's the only guy. Like you're paying the guy a lot.
Yeah, it's a tough question, but like there's also politics and dynamics that play out within a sport team. So you'll find that sport medicine and head coach can have either opposing philosophies or aligned philosophies. Sometimes the head coach is going to listen in and just let sport medicine decide. The biggest thing that sport medicine and physio get judged on is how do you make sure that everybody's still in good shape, and if they're injured, how do you make sure you recover them as fast as possible? But this is where it gets interesting, right? Because if you rush that recovery process, you're almost, in sports science research, the number one predictor of injury is previous injury. So this is why, like, as an athlete, if you get injured once, your value drops dramatically because there's just a much higher likelihood of you getting hurt again. So there's a big focus on if you're going to recover somebody, don't rush it. So in short, to be honest, my answer is like let them take as much as they need. Because I bet you anything, the athletes are dying to get back on the field and play.
It's interesting though, because when you have that dynamic where the like strength and conditioning or medicine is their metric and their how you judge how well they do their job is injury.
Yeah.
So their motivation is exactly keep them out a lot, right? And the head coach's metric is winning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm very much.
Yeah, but I think head coach will always win that battle, right? So if anything, it's actually better for the sport physio and the strength coach to really try to hold their ground. And I find in good sport cultures, and I've seen some incredible teams, and I've seen some bad cultures, to be honest, over the years. The good ones is where there's an established element of trust, and there is a sense of like, if this is what the physio is saying, we're going to wait. This is what the strength coach is saying, we're going to wait, and then we're going to kind of play it safe. Yeah, it's these seasons, as short as they might feel to us, they're long, right? So it's really important to just figure out how do I make sure that they're ready when I absolutely need them to down the road. Yeah. So I think we had a question over there, if I remember.
Yeah, I was just curious. Of all of the movements you captured, what was most difficult to measure accurately to determine whether an athlete was improving at that movement?
One of the most difficult, I would say the Olympic lifts in general were some of the most difficult ones to track because there's just so much variation. So we work with Olympic weightlifters, which they're a fun breed of athletes. It's really intense sport to kind of also compete in, similar to track and field to some extent. But it's some of the movements are incredibly complex, and there's just a tremendous amount of noise. Like my background is engineering, I can get really geeky around the tech and the hardware especially. But I can tell you in a nutshell, those movements were some of the toughest. The rest are pretty straightforward. Like, to be honest, baseball, pitching, those kinds of movements are fairly straightforward to model, and they're fairly consistent. Olympic weightlifting, lots of variations. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know you guys mentioned a CrossFit band.
Yeah.
How are you dealing with measuring so many varieties of movements?
Yeah.
Because the variety is high in a short period of time.
Great question. Yeah, we kind of got pulled into CrossFit. We weren't really thinking about tackling CrossFit, but for years we've been getting asked by CrossFit coaches, can you track CrossFit? Can you track CrossFit? Can you track? And we looked into it, and it's actually really different than the way, it's similar in that the movements are the same, but it's different than the ways traditional athletes train. Traditional athletes take lots of breaks in between, so our system was designed with this idea of real-time feedback, and then you take a 60-second break and you kind of move on, and that's what we designed our entire flow to do. With CrossFit and Nexus, what we had to figure out is the athlete can't be anywhere near the phone. Once they start the workout, they have to finish the workout. So how do you do that? So we actually ended up building a machine learning model, leveraging the data that we built with Push, to essentially automatically detect the type of exercise based on the movement signal. It's a really tough project. We spent, and the credit goes to the CTO on our team for putting this together, but it took us about 4 months to deploy it, test it, ship it, and it's performing incredibly well. It's like we've become converts now. We're always thinking about how do we now leverage the data sets that we have to actually do more work like that. But it's really cool to see because you can basically build a full workout, hit start, and just go. You can take a water break and go talk to your buddy and come back, and it'll just know automatically if you're doing an exercise or not. Yeah.
So in sports, sometimes you have guys who are like freaks in the weight room or they're good practice players.
Yeah.
And then when the game comes, they're not very good players.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier in your presentation about tactics. Does
Yeah.
your company plan on going into the realm of tactics, or do you plan on staying
Yeah.
more of the strength and conditioning space?
I think we're going to focus mainly on preparation and physical. There's a bunch of companies that are doing like statistical modeling of different scenarios, and one that's really interesting that's worth checking out is called Second Spectrum. They're doing a lot of work in the NBA around just like modeling out different plays and what's the most effective play against a specific formation. And they're doing a lot of good work there. It's a whole other beast, but it's super exciting as well. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, yeah.
Two-parter, but they're related. Would you consider this the new Moneyball?
Yeah.
A, and B, are you seeing, since we talked about pro athletes, you're also going to have pro agents.
Yes.
So are you seeing agents collect this data and create these sort of like presentations like, hey, look at my man,
Yeah.
and it's like boom, 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 look at these like
Yeah.
metrics.
Absolutely, yeah. So to answer your first question, absolutely. It's already happening. There's not a single team in North America that I know of that doesn't have at least a single data scientist. And the ones that are aggressive are building out full staff around this. So it's happening.
I'm sure you mean in college, right?
Yeah, D1, we just finished a tour out of the Midwest and Ohio State and Michigan, like, forget about it. Like, I've never seen anything of the scale. And these guys are aggressively chasing this. So it's happening already, and I think it's only going to get more exciting over the next 5 to 10 years. To answer your second question, most Asians, what they're doing is they're partnering with private training centers, and we work in the training performance world. Basically, they have a trusted guru in the space, and they basically are using them to do exactly what you described. So we typically sell to the training performance centers. They do testing across their entire chain, including the like fresh prospects that have a shot at getting recruited, and then they are building out full profiles. We have a couple that we've mocked up internally for a recent training facility that look really cool too. So yeah, this is kind of, I think, where this could potentially go, and I'm kind of excited. I play soccer every Saturday, even out in the winter, and I'm starting to see some companies in our space try to build stuff out for amateurs even, that look somewhat similar. So there's kind of a cool trend that's going on over there. I do have one last slide, I'll be super quick. I just want to plant a bug in your ear about where things are going in the space. I figured it would be good to stop there before we start talking about the future, make sure all your questions are answered. In terms of big trends that you can kind of expect over the next 5, 10 years, I kind of summed them up into 4 here. Machine learning, we've kind of talked about it already. There's tons of work to be done there. The data has been largely getting collected over the past 10, 15 years. So a lot of teams are sitting on mounds and mounds of data, and now they're starting to think, how do I leverage this? How do I use it? So there's obviously, just like every other industry, to be honest, this is happening, and it's kind of cool to see how it's happening in sport. Seamless data collection. Hardware has gotten to a really good stage, but there's still so much more work to be done. I just came back from a conference in California where we've seen flexible batteries, machine washable smart apparel that has sensors built right in. There's all kinds of different innovations happening at hardware level. The ultimate goal is just make it as invisible as possible. That's basically it. So we need to get away from lab tech. We need to get away from having to strap a million sensors on an athlete. We need to get to a point where it's invisible. The athlete can focus on their psychology, and we can focus on collecting the data we need. So that's where it's going. Blockchain and data regulation. This is not a topic that's really discussed often outside of sport, but it's such a relevant discussion. Every single conference I hear about this now. Basically, who owns the data? We're capturing all this information, but who owns it? And why is an elite athlete that's getting all this data collected off them has no stake whatsoever in how the data is being monetized? There's all these marketing teams within the sport organization now looking ways to leverage it. The data that we see in the score about individual athletes, especially as the data becomes more and more relevant, more personal, how is the athlete involved? And this is a topic that's really coming up. And the reason I mention blockchain is because whenever we think about ownership of data, that's a theme that I'm seeing, is that blockchain and the idea of a decentralized network, you kind of see what's happening, and who owns it is really relevant. So this is a topic that's coming up quite a bit. And finally, the quantified fan. Just if you think the score looks crazy right now, wait till you see where it's going to come next. I think it's going to get even more and more interesting to just understand the psychology of these athletes. And I think the most exciting thing for me with the last one is there's a big push by the IOC right now, the International Olympic Committee, to actually start getting data, especially biometrics, about sports that we traditionally, quote unquote, consider boring. Like I met with a gold-winning medalist sharpshooter from Italy last year, and we had such an interesting conversation because he's he showed me a video of his winning round, and he's standing there. And as a fan, I'm like, you just look like you're standing there. You're not doing anything. And everybody else is just standing there. And he's like, you should know what's going through my head to be able to hit that little shot 100 meters away. And we started thinking about, imagine if you had, the name slips my mind now, but it's a local Canadian company, and you can actually see what's going through his mind, like how he's able to control his heart rate, how he's in such an intense environment. Those are the kind of things that we can start expecting to see, much more personal data that can really give us a sense of what these guys are going through. That guys and girls that are spending like 4 years practicing for this single event. So anyways, Tokyo 2020 is around the corner, so stay tuned and you might see some exciting things around that too. So thanks for taking the time, guys. I appreciate it. I think we went a little long, sorry. But if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. We can talk a little bit more. I can talk about this stuff for hours. Thanks.